Chapter 6. The Crown of Tanasi. Oh, could their ancient Incas rise again? How would they take up Israel's taunting strain? William Cooper. British colonial officials recognized the usefulness of having natives visit England as soon as possible. There, they might be overawed with mother country's wealth and intimidated by its formidable military might. Between visiting the Tower of London and going to plays and rat-catching shows, such delegations had their official portraits painted by court artists. As recounted in the book, Indians Abroad, they then returned home with news about the teeming numbers of Englishmen and hopeless odds involved in fighting King George. They also acquired a taste for English goods. My ancestor, Atakalakala, ordered a pipe organ to be delivered to his home in the Tennessee wilderness, so his wife might learn to play it. He had been intrigued by the one he saw in St. Paul's Cathedral. One of the records of these visits by Indians to Europe is a large oil painting titled An Audience Given by the Trustees of Georgia to a Delegation of Creek Indians, 1734 to 35. It is now owned by the Winterthur Museum in Delaware, but it used to hang in the trustees' offices in London. In it, the sponsors of the new colony of Georgia are assembled at their London headquarters, receiving a visiting party of Indians, usually identified as Creek. The painting is the work of William Verelst, a Dutch master who painted for the court. The nominal occasion is the 1734 state visit of Tomochichi, died October 5, 1739. Tomochichi was the Yamacraw Indian who befriended the colony's founder, General James Edward Oglethorpe. Tomochichi opened many doors for the English settlers in Savannah. This painting was displayed in the Whitehall offices of the trustees, as long as they continued in existence. To this day, reproductions can be found in museums and offices across the state of Georgia and beyond. Upon dissolution of the trustees in 1752 and conversion of Georgia to a royal colony, the original passed to Anthony Ashley Cooper, 4th Earl of Shaftesbury. It remained in the Cooper family until acquired by the industrialist Henry Francis DuPont in the 1930s. In 1926, the 9th Earl presented to the state of Georgia a copy painted by Edmund Dyer in 1826. Despite the original painting's fame, not much is known about it. Art critics assume it was based on preliminary studies, either live sessions or renditions, and that the work was completed over a period of several years following the Georgia Indians' visit to London in June to October 1734. Of the painting, Edgar P. Richardson writes, William Verelst belonged to one of those transplanted families of artists whom the English think of as Dutch and the Dutch think of as English, and who are, in consequence, ignored by both. Art reference books contain scant mentions of him. Another Verelst, John, probably a cousin, is better known. He painted official full-length portraits of the 5 Iroquois Confederacy chiefs who visited Queen Anne in 1710. If the artist is mysterious, his subjects, at least the Indian ones, are even more so. All the Englishmen are identified. These include the president of the trustees, Viscount Percival, Earl of Egmont, the Earl of Shaftesbury, and Oglethorpe. But of the Indians, only Tomochichi is named. He appears prominently in the center of the scene, handing a devotional book to an Indian boy. The Indians fill the right half of the canvas in a formal diptych opposite the white man, with an interpreter, identified by some as John Musgrove, interceding between them and the British. On the frame of a later copy of the painting, the Indian boy is identified as Toanahoe, Tomochichi's nephew. The sole female figure is Sonaki, his wife. A portrait or study by Verelst of Tomochichi and his nephew confirms these identities. The other 5 Indians, including the conspicuous young man in the foreground with a mohawk hairstyle, have never been identified. In most reproductions, they are simply labeled Indians, Creek Indians, or Yamacraw Indians. I will demonstrate they are not Creek, but Cherokee. Our first clue is the small-framed Indian holding a fan in the foreground. This is fairly obviously Atakalakala, who visited England with a party of Cherokees in 1730, 4 years before the Creek mission. Investigation of the diplomacy of the delegation of 1730 and 1734 supports this identification. French Algonquin Indians were prominent in the affairs of Cherokees in this period. The Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, English, and French had radically different ceremonies of possession by which they legitimized their claims in the New World. The English method was normally to make surveys and treaties and mark their possessions with houses, gardens, and fences. Often a twig or piece of turf was presented from the old owners, the Indians, to the new ones. Colonies were thus imagined as plantations, plantings of English agrarian society in a foreign setting. French employed a different approach. If the English model was grounded in a national love of gardens and le comfort anglais, the French right of possession rested, according to historian Patricia Seed, on a flair for drama. It was staged along the lines of the Joyeuse Entrée, featuring a French monarch or lord entering a free city. Key elements were elaborate costumes, dancing, and music. Amid festivities, the people gave their open consent to receive the visitor in hospitality and friendship. A French explorer describes his expedition as conquest not by arms, but by the cross, not by force, but by love, which has sweetly led them to donate themselves and their country to the King of France. As a consequence, the French enjoyed better relations with the Indians. Certain elements in the audience painting reflect a French concept of diplomacy. This should not surprise us at a time when Parisian court life and opera set the tone for other countries. The English, it must be remembered, were at this time trying to woo Indians away from the French, and so the overall scene is one of stately entry, festivity, and joy. Tomochichi is painted with a definite, if artificial smile, reaching out the hand of friendship. So what actual model did Verelst use for the 5 remaining Indians? Why were these not identified? There are several possible answers to this question. 1. The English did not know the Indians' names. 2. Their names have been lost through an accident of history. 3. The 5 Indians were not thought important. Or 4. They are not whom we suppose them to be. The last alternative is our best explanation. The Indians are not who we might think they are. The trustees had good reason to omit the names of Tomochichi's attendants and lump them together with no tribal identity if they were actually from a previous delegation. Significantly, the Creek Indians returned to Savannah before their portraits could be done, except for Tomochichi and his family. No Indians were available in London as live models during the years Verelst worked on the painting from 1734 to 1735. The representations of Creek chiefs, Hilaspili, Apakautsky, Stimalchi, Sintucci, and Hingwiti, are feigned portraits. Attaching their names would have been a transparent fiction. Let us consider next what the true identity of these Georgia Indians might be by looking at a previous attempt at British treaty-making. In 1730, a scapegrace Scots laird by the name of Alexander Cummings traveled to the overhill towns of the Cherokee and captured what he later called the crown of Tanasi. Originally intended to bring back the king, Moitoi, he persuaded instead 7 countrymen, mostly younger Cherokees, to meet George II in London. His main contacts in Cherokee country were the brothers William and Joseph Cooper, traders based at Kiowa in South Carolina. We have encountered the Cooper name before. Evidently, William and Joseph Cooper belonged to the same Marano family as Robert Cooper, the London merchant whose DNA we analyzed before. The Cummings adventure resulted in an unofficial alliance between the Cherokee and English, though the Board of Commissioners ended up giving little credit to him. Later, the treaty was repudiated by the Cherokee chiefs. An outraged war party looted and burned the Coopers' trading post. The famous Crown of Tanasi, which Cummings had his Cherokee captives lay at the feet of the English sovereign, was tossed aside in a royal closet at Hampton Court and never seen again. The Scottish baronet from Aberdeen, responsible for this fiasco, is described by modern-day writers with words like bizarre, madcap, and eccentric. In and out of debtor's prison, he died in ignominious circumstances. One of his more audacious schemes was the establishment of a stock company that would settle 300,000 honest and industrious European Jews among the Cherokee Indians. This white elephant may have been inspired by John Law's Mississippi Bubble. Cummings also claimed to be the deliverer of the Jews. That he himself was a Jew seems more than likely from all the circumstances of his life and career. He was called by his mother a few days before her death, both Jacob and Israel. If we ask how Cummings even knew of the existence of 300,000 Jews, a fairly accurate estimate of Ashkenazi Jews in Eastern Europe at the time, some surprising facts emerge. Like many Aberdeen burghers, he spent the first part of his career as a merchant and soldier in Russia and Lithuania. He may have retained connections with Eastern Jewry, for, wild as his projects were, some of the most learned Jews seemed to have given him several patient hearings on the subject. One can infer that Sir Alexander was an Aberdeen crypto-Jew. The family name comes from the Flemish nobleman Cummins, a knight who accompanied William the Conqueror to England and boasted of being directly descended from Charlemagne. The Cummings clan's association with Gordons, Sutherlands, and Seatons supports Jewish roots. While the 7 Cherokee were in London, their movements were followed closely in the press. A popular engraving was made of them in the clothes that had been presented to them by the king. This etching is said to have been done by Isaac Bazire after a painting by Markham, now evidently lost. Shown in St. James's Garden, they are identified as Onin Nukoa, Skaliloskin Ketakaska, Tatoi, Klakoka, and Ukwaniqua. The last mentioned, Ukwaniqua, White Owl, is small of stature, slender of frame, and boyish-looking. He wears his hair in a mohawk, a sign he is a northerly or Algonquin. As suspected at the outset of this inquiry, he can be none other than Atakalakala, Leaningwood, Supreme Peace Chief of the Cherokee, 1760 to 1775. The engraving and painting captures him at about the age of 20. Since there is no mention of a youth among the visiting Creek and Yamacraw Indians other than the boy Toho Anahawi, this must be Atakalakala. The 1730 etching shows him carrying the eagle feather wand that the Cherokees presented to King George. In the 1734 painting, he has the same feather wand. The Quaker naturalist Bartram described him as a man of remarkable small stature, slender, and of a delicate frame, the only instance I saw in the Cherokee Nation, but he is a man of superior abilities. In later life, Atacalaculla often mentioned his trip to England and offered to go back and see the great King George. So who are the other Cherokees in the painting? Tetawi, Tistoi, a ceremonial title meaning smoke-maker, is the tall figure with dangling sidelocks. In the 1734 grouping, he is evidently the headman of Kiowa, remembered as the fifth to join Cummings's party in 1730. The Cherokee title Tistoi distinguished an official responsible for smudging or producing the sacrificial smoke in the assembly house. Today it refers to Santa Claus, bringer of firecrackers during holidays. The word probably comes from Greek typo, to raise smoke. The short figure on the extreme right in the 1734 painting is Clogoita, gun carrier, another title. He was from Tanasi, the home of the crown, fourth to join Cummings's party. The older man behind Tomochichi in the 1734 painting, second from the left in the 1730 etching, and labeled Skaliloskin, speaker, Ketagusta, second in command, are the same persons. The Cherokee title, Skaliloskin, which cannot be analyzed into Greek elements, seems to come from Greek, karax, herald. In both instances, it is a title borne by the man responsible for summoning an assembly, delivering talks, and making diplomatic contact with the enemy. Our Kitagusta, in reality, was probably the son of French Huguenot trader John Beamer and a Cherokee woman named Quatsi, Patsy, Patty. Appropriately, Kitagusta the speaker was chosen by the 1730 delegation to make a ceremonial speech in response to the treaty drafted by the British. The muscular war chief in the foreground of the 1734 painting is the same figure as the one in the background of the 1730 etching. He is Kolana, the raven of Satiko, brother of the same Quati. That this is Kolana of Satiko, not the Greek Yuchi war chief Umpihichi, follows from the facts as we have established them, namely that Umpihichi died before the audience with the trustees took place. The brother of the mother or maternal uncle was considered the head of the household, according to Cherokee custom. Hence, Kolana stands behind the speaker, Ketagusta, and Mankiller, his sister's children, in the 1730 etching. The remaining two Cherokees from the 1730 delegation do not appear in the 1734 painting. They are 1. Utasaiti, Mankiller, Skiagusta, great warrior, headman of Tasechi, the second to join Cummings's party after Atacalaculla, and brother of Skaliloskin, Kitaguska, called Uka Ula, principal chief to be by the English, and 2. Unakanoi, white deer, second from the right next to Atacalaculla, a last-minute addition to the Cummings party from the upper towns. Thus, 3 of the 7 are members of Quatsi's family, situated at the time in the Cherokee town of Tasechi. One might speculate that Verelst omitted the chiefly figure of Utasaiti, since the role of a headman in the 1734 scene was filled by Tomochichi. Summing up, Verelst's graphically realized details showed there was a lost painting or study upon which his portraits were based. Markham's painting, and the engraving inspired by it, depicts the Cherokees in English clothes, but the trustees' painting has them in native dress. Perhaps an intermediary picture from 1730 was discarded after the Cherokees revoked the treaty, but used out of convenience as a mold for the trustees' painting in 1734. 2 members of the 1730 delegation, Kitagusta, the speaker, and Kolana, the raven of Satiko, previously of Tasechi, are evidently mixed, not full-bloods. Kolana exhibits a muscular build atypical of American Indians, more like black slaves or Europeans. Cherokee historian Brent Cox says Kolana, brother of Quati, married Nancy, who was one-half white. It was unusual at that time for an Indian male to marry a white or part-white woman. The inference is perhaps that he also bore some non-Indian genes. There could have been African ancestry in his parents' makeup. The names Quati, Patty, and Nancy, Nanhei, moreover, are not originally Cherokee names. John Beamer, Beemore, French Benamor, Sephardic surname Benamor, was a French Huguenot of an Iberian Jewish family fleeing from the Spanish Inquisition. His father came to the Carolina colony soon after the foundation of Charlestown. Beamer met Quati in 1699, and was thus one of the first white men, along with Alexander Doherty and Joseph Cooper, to intermarry with the Cherokee. She was his Indian wife. He had a series of white wives back in the settlements, one of them the daughter of the governor. On the frontier, he received the name Beaver, Cherokee, Atoihi, English, Moitoi. Cox regards this as a clerical error, but why should we not take it at face value? One meaning of the word is beaver, another is mariner. We know that John Beamer's grandson, Thomas Beamer, was called a mustie, proof of some degree of African blood, derived from mestizo. This term is confined to admixtures of the Indian and Negro races. In the Beamer Moitoi family, then, we can trace genealogically and pictorially a triracial mixture later known as Melungeon, the white constituent in which is Sephardic Jewish. By the year 1730, there was a significant degree of admixture among the Cherokee, including French, English, Portuguese, Spanish, Moroccan, Scottish, African, and Jewish strains. This admixture appears to be concentrated in the ruling families of the largest overhill towns, Tellico, Ichota, and Satico, located primarily in what is now Monroe County, Tennessee. English, Scottish, and French merchants out of Charleston, typically Sephardic Jews, were the first to intermarry with the Cherokee. It has often been maintained that the office of principal chief was not introduced among the Cherokees and other southeastern tribes until the British created it, wishing to have a single authority to deal with on matters of trade. English policy was to appoint headmen to sign treaties for all towns in their nation. As R.S. Cotterill, for instance, says of the 1721 treaty at Congaree, the British created on Governor Francis Nicholson's suggestion the new office of principal chief, elevating thereto a chief whom the Carolina writers have effectively distinguished as Rositasital, a form of Utasaiti, man-killer, from the lower town of Eastatoe. The historian Charles Hudson agrees the principal chief did not come into fashion until the mid-18th century, when a breed of Indians who might be termed Fort Indians gathered around the trading posts built on the southeastern frontier. Moitoi, Old Hop, the non-entity, Amiskosite, Atakalakala, and Okonostota thus served as treaty chiefs for the Cherokee. In the same way, Tomochichi and the Emperor Brim function as puppets manipulated by the English in Georgia. Kanchak Imaiki, Chief Skunkhole, fulfills the same role among the Choctaws until the French have him killed. Such a picture of tribal government may not be completely accurate. The principal actors in the Cherokee nation at this time were Jews. The Stuart monarchs had long favored Portuguese and Scottish Sephardim because they knew that Jews harbored an abiding hatred of the Spanish. If captured, Moranos and New Christians would be burned at the stake as heretics. They knew it. For this reason, Savannah Jews of Sephardic background fled to nearby Charleston during the brief war of Jenkins' Ear when it seemed the Spanish might invade Georgia. Only Ashkenazi Jews like the Sheftals remained behind. How much of Jewish participation in Cherokee politics was opportunistic, and how much was born out of the traders' recognition of genetic and religious ties cannot be known. But the official titles used by the Cherokee delegation of 1730 confirm the story of the Cherokee. Most of them are Greek and military in inspiration, from Moitoi Admiral to Skaliloskin Herald and Kolanu Keranos. The true origin of the Uku, or peace chief, explains the significance of the crown of Tanasi, for the Uku traditionally wore an otter headdress. After nearly 2,000 years, and in their own way, the Cherokee retained many of the customs of the original Cherokee. No ordinary colonists, these. They appear to have been selected for intellectual standing and superior knowledge. One leader was a philosopher king. Another was called the Admiral.